Robert Maxwell didn't just build a fortune, he built a fortress, a $4.5 billion empire spanning newspapers, book publishing, music labels, and television. A global reach that looked like ordinary media domination on the surface. But behind the headlines he controlled were secrets darker than most fiction dared to write. Pension fund theft, intelligence operations, manipulated information flows. He turned knowledge into leverage, and leverage into control. At the peak of his power, he was a man who could call the prime minister before breakfast, fly to New York for lunch with diplomats, and be back in his 53-room English estate by dinner. But empires this large don't rise without shadows, and his daughter, Ghislaine, was watching every move, because while Robert Maxwell built his fortune from ink and deception, his favorite child would inherit something far more sinister. A role at the center of a trafficking operation that prosecutors would later describe as a pyramid of abuse, a network that preyed on girls as young as 14. And to understand how a family became synonymous with wealth, control, and exploitation, we need to start with the man who invented himself from scratch. This is Hidden Billionaire, the channel that decodes the fortunes built, not just with money, but with manipulation. In this episode, we're pulling apart the illusion behind the Maxwell empire, the lies, the influence, and the machinery that powered one of the most controversial families of the modern age. What you're about to hear isn't conspiracy. It's all public record. If you know where to look. The man the world knew as Robert Maxwell was not born with that name. He was born, Jahan Ludwig Hyman, by Namin Ho, in a forgotten village in what was then Czechoslovakia, a village so remote. Even the roads seemed to give up before reaching it. One of 9 children in an Orthodox Jewish family, he came into the world with nothing. Not shoes, not heat, not even citizenship that would protect him. And when the Nazis came, they took everything. His parents, his siblings, all disappeared into the machinery of genocide. Jahan was the only one who escaped. By the time the war ended, he had become something else. A British soldier, a decorated war hero, and finally, Robert Maxwell, a name he chose himself, ripped from a Scottish tombstone. The name sounded clean, wealthy, unquestionable. But Maxwell didn't just reinvent himself, he devoured opportunity. And in the rubble of post-war Europe, he found gold, not in banks or factories, but in paper. Because in the ruins of Berlin, Maxwell discovered the intellectual property of the defeated Reich. Scientific journals, research archives, unclaimed knowledge. While the world rebuilt, he repackaged the future and sold it. But this would only be the first layer of the empire he was constructing. To understand how Maxwell turned academic journals into money-printing machines and eventually into political power, we need to look at his most lucrative business model. In 1949, Maxwell had taken over Pergamon Press, a publishing company that most thought was too small to matter. It had only 6 journals and 2 books. But Maxwell wasn't interested in volume. He saw a flaw in the system and a way to exploit it. Universities needed journals. Scientists needed to be published. The demand was endless. So Maxwell did what few had dared to try. He charged researchers to publish their work, then charged universities to read it. He got paid coming and going, and no one stopped him. He scaled rapidly. Hundreds of journals, thousands of subscribers. By the 1980s, Pergamon was a juggernaut. But Maxwell wasn't finished. He bought the Mirror Group, one of the largest newspaper companies in the UK, then Macmillan Publishers, Nimbus Records, MTV Europe, Oxford United Football Club, a patchwork of assets designed not just to make money, but to influence how people saw the world, and he lived accordingly. His Oxfordshire mansion had 53 rooms. His yacht, the Lady Ghislaine, was a floating palace. He traveled by private jet and Concorde. He once called his estate the best council house in Britain, a joke made at the expense of taxpayers who helped him get it. But behind this luxury, something more deliberate was happening. Maxwell's companies became tools. Some say he was laundering influence. Others say he was doing something worse, cooperating with intelligence agencies. MI6, Mossad, the CIA. Rumors swirled that Maxwell wasn't just a media baron, he was an information broker. The man who knew who was sleeping with whom, and what. Secrets, they whispered behind closed doors. This dual life, public magnate and secret manipulator, could have gone on forever. But then, one morning, in 1991, Maxwell disappeared from his yacht. And when his body was pulled from the sea, the illusion collapsed. Because the moment Robert Maxwell died, investigators opened the books. What they found would shock even his closest allies. Within days of Maxwell's death, panic gripped the Mirror Group headquarters. Financial records began to surface. And what they revealed was staggering. Hundreds of millions were missing. Pensions had been raided. Around £460 million, close to $1 billion today, had been siphoned from employee retirement accounts to prop up Maxwell's collapsing empire. He had mortgaged everything, sold and resold assets, transferred funds between hundreds of companies he controlled. and nobody knew how deep it went. Some of the money went into real estate, some into lavish parties, some into foreign bank accounts that vanished along with him. A media titan, who promised truth, had been cooking his books for years. Parliament opened investigations. His sons, Kevin and Ian, were charged with fraud, though later acquitted. But the family name was shattered. Maxwell had gone from hero to villain in a single news cycle, and yet, one person seemed oddly untouched by the wreckage. His youngest daughter, the one he named his yacht after, walked away with her inheritance, mostly intact. Ghislaine Maxwell, the elegant socialite, had been her father's favorite, and now, she had plans of her own, plans that would take her across the Atlantic, and into the orbit of a man even more mysterious than her father. Ghislaine Maxwell was born into privilege, but not love. The youngest of 9 children, she entered the world just days before her brother. Michael suffered a traumatic brain injury that left him in a coma for 7 years. She later recalled being virtually ignored in her early childhood, an invisible figure in a house, overwhelmed by grief and ambition. But Ghislaine was a survivor. She learned how to charm, how to flatter, how to become indispensable. While her siblings buckled under their father's authoritarian rule, Ghislaine adapted. She became the golden child. Robert Maxwell repaid her loyalty with gifts. She was made director of Oxford United Football Club. She traveled the world with him, and most importantly, she observed how he operated. The network of friends, the favors, the psychological manipulation. When Robert died, Ghislaine fled to New York. She claimed she had no part in his financial crimes, and maybe she didn't. But she took with her the lessons and the ambition. In Manhattan, she entered high society with ease. Fluent in French, polished at Oxford, her British accent and pedigree opened doors at elite galas and political fundraisers, and then she met Jeffrey Epstein, a financier with no clear business. Epstein seemed to appear from nowhere, and so did his money. He was mysterious, connected, and hungry for power. Ghislaine was exactly what he needed. She became more than a girlfriend. She was a partner, a fixer, a recruiter, and what they built together would eventually be exposed as one of the most disturbing abuse networks in modern history. But the full scope wouldn't come to light for years. Because for nearly a decade, Ghislaine and Epstein lived like royalty, and no one asked questions. At least, not until the first victim came forward. From 1994 to 2004, prosecutors say Ghislaine Maxwell helped Jeffrey Epstein run a trafficking operation that targeted teenage girls, under the guise of mentorship and opportunity. The method was chillingly effective. Young women, often vulnerable from broken homes or economic hardship, were approached by Maxwell with offers that seemed too good to be true. Modeling connections, internships, education support, all laced with subtle grooming tactics. One victim, Virginia Giuffre, was working at Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort when she was recruited at 16. Another, Annie Farmer, testified she was abused after being flown out for what she believed was a college visit. Maxwell wasn't just recruiting. She was coaching, instructing victims on how to massage Epstein, gradually escalating the behavior until the lines between help and harm were erased. And then, the worst part, victims were asked to recruit others. It became a pyramid, a system where girls who had been manipulated became part of the machine. Epstein's infamous Little Black Book contained hundreds of names and contact details. The operation spanned multiple countries, from Florida to New Mexico to the Caribbean. Powerful people were always nearby. Prince Andrew, Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, CEOs, scientists, academics. No accusations were made against most of them, but their proximity gave Epstein and Maxwell the perfect cover. Who would believe a 15-year-old girl over the friends of royalty? When Epstein was arrested in 2019, the story finally cracked open, and after his suspicious death in custody, the spotlight turned to Ghislaine. She vanished for months. Then, in 2020, the FBI found her in a secluded New Hampshire mansion. She was arrested, denied bail. At trial, witnesses laid bare the structure of abuse, the manipulation, the flights, the patterns that matched almost exactly, victim after victim. In December 2021, Maxwell was convicted on 5 federal charges, including conspiracy and trafficking. In June 2022, she was sentenced to 20 years, but the story didn't end there. After Maxwell's conviction, silence fell over the case. Epstein was gone. Key associates, like Jean-Luc Brunel, died under mysterious circumstances. Even Virginia Giuffre, one of the most vocal survivors, died in a suspicious car crash in 2025. A tragedy many still question. Maxwell now sits in a Florida prison, 3 years into a 20-year sentence. She has given few interviews, no memoir, no real confession, but rumors still circulate. About blackmail tapes, about safes filled with information, about the people who were never named and never charged. Robert Maxwell died on the deck of his yacht with billions in debt and too many secrets. Ghislaine followed a different route, but the ending feels eerily similar. Because what began as a rags to riches tale of reinvention and ambition became a generational pattern of power, used not for progress, but for control. A family that turned privilege into leverage. Secrets into currency. In the end, the Maxwell story isn't just about one man or one woman. It's about what happens when people with no limits gain access to systems with no oversight. It's about the machinery of media, wealth, and reputation, and how it can be weaponized. From a barefoot boy in a war-torn village to a daughter orchestrating recruitment in Manhattan mansions, the arc of this family traces the dark geometry of unchecked ambition. And while the headlines have faded, the questions haven't, because behind every scandal that fades from view, there are always names we never hear, and truths no one dares to tell.